they are understanding God through the lens of the earth, and that God is speaking to them through the lens of the earth. We can't imagine the ancients being environmentalists really any more than we can think of them being astronauts or laparoscopic surgeons or something. So, and in a few small cases within the biblical context, we do see humans kind of rising above the earth in a way and kind of transcending this seeing God through the earth. And that tends to happen most when power can be concentrated. When grain and wine and oil can be, commodities that can be centralized and then give power to. So we see maybe that happen a little bit with the Pharaoh or Babylon being able to enslave Israel. Or we see that in the first century context that Jesus is in with the Roman Empire kind of being able to occupy Israel, but its main concerns are not resident in the land of Israel. They're resident in Rome and in Italy. And the empire has a certain set of things that are important to it that have nothing to do with the local context of the land of Israel or the people there. And so those human concerns that aren't connected to the earth get projected out onto who it is. And ultimately in the Caesar is the god. Caesar becomes God there. So in human history, we see this most dramatically in the Industrial Revolution, and in predating that, the Enlightenment. That kind of becomes the human kind of Prometheus fire that enables humanity to lift itself above the earth in ways that aren't wholly good for us in the long run. And we start to conceive of God outside of the earth's lens. And we attribute things to God solely from human interaction that might or might not be accurate about God. So when I use the term rising above the earth, someone asked about that last week. And so this might be a way of understanding that. If you have an apple tree in your backyard and you go out and pick the apple and you tend and care for the tree, then that's about as close to the earth as you can get. It's right there in your own yard where you live. It's right next to, might be only feet from your bedroom or from your kitchen, and you can just pick an apple off the tree and eat it, and you're connected to that tree. If you get an apple from the grocery store, that may have come from hundreds or even 1,000 miles or so away from where you live, and it's mitigated by all kinds of processes, from truck drivers to migrant farm workers to pesticides, to all kinds of things that distance you from the earth that actually created that apple, and you start to live a little higher above the earth and less connected with it. And then the most egregious kind of extreme example might be the Oreo, the apple pie Oreo, which is not an apple. It's not even remotely close to an apple. It might have a little bit of natural flavoring that's been concentrated from an apple and injected, but it's actually corn syrup and grain that's been processed, and some yellow number 5 and some chemical products that have nothing to do with the earth. And one of the irreparable harms of this change in theology because of this rising above the earth is that the folks kind of lowest on the economic scale often are the most reduced to eating what isn't close to the earth now. So it's much harder for someone in a ghetto to have access to an industrial apple, let alone a backyard apple, than they can get, an Oreo, apple pie Oreo from the convenience store. Ultimately, this kind of thinking, this level of living above the earth without kind of being connected to its consequences, has led to this really global level crisis. and we're seeing all kinds of consequences to the way we've lived long term, this theology that isn't sustainable, and we're facing this kind of crisis. So my question for us tonight is kind of how might we return to an earth-formed theology? And in the first two sessions, Jay gave us some great understanding of going back to our original foundational texts and scriptures and theology, and noticing how those scriptural contexts actually have a resident theology that can help us understand how to deal with this crisis. So he talks specifically about stewardship and the new creation. And I think those are really great answers, and we can find a way through. But I've also wondered, is there a indigenous theology to the land that we live in that might, in dialogue with our, Christian theology, might help us see in a new light kind of new ways to escape this kind of enlightenment theology that we've come under the spell of. I want to be careful to say, that it's a complicated historical problem to get into, is this economic and moral and theology system that we live in right now that's led to the climate crisis is or not Christian, because Christianity has been the dominant religion through so much of the Western experience, it's easy to say, well, the Christian theology is at root the problem here. But that's not exactly the case. As Jay has shown us, there's elements in our theology that really point us to a different outcome and a different way of living than the way Western society has developed. So it's a question of have we really lived out the Christian values that we have? But given how tied Christianity is to the way the economic structures that we've developed, can we look for a different point of reference that might help us here? And I think as I talk about this concept of reciprocity, you'll hear overlaps with stewardship and the new creation here. I'm drawing from these excerpts from a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Some of you have read this, but I think it'll still be valuable for you to listen to these excerpts. And Robin Wall Kimmerer is unique in the fact that she is a scientist and an indigenous person and a theologian. And so she kind of is one of the premier thinkers that's able to kind of bring all these three things together in our current structure. So tonight I'm going to be reading some excerpts from her book that talk about these elements. And I'm going to leave these up on the screen while I read this, just to make it easy for you to, I guess what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and I'll just read them so you can listen to them. So the first one talks about the nature of gift as an organizing principle. It's funny how the nature of an object, let's say a strawberry or a pair of socks, is so changed by the way it has come into our hands as a gift or as a commodity. The pair of wool socks that I buy at the store are warm and cozy. I might feel grateful for the sheep that made the wool and the worker who ran the knitting machine. I hope I'm grateful, but I have no inherent obligation to the socks as a commodity, as private property. There's no bond beyond the politely exchanged thank you with the clerk at the register. I have paid for them, and our reciprocity ended the minute I handed her the money. But what if those very same socks were knitted by my grandmother and given to me as a gift? Well, that changes everything. A gift creates ongoing relationship. I will write a thank you note. I will take good care of the socks, and if I'm a very gracious grandchild, I'll wear them when my grandmother visits, even if I don't like the socks. When it's her birthday, I will surely make her a gift in return. As the scholar Lewis Hyde writes, it is the cardinal difference between gift and commodity exchange that a gift establishes a feeling bond between two people. Let's think about that gift. Here's another excerpt. This talks about responsibilities in relationship to the gift. From the viewpoint of a private property economy, the gift is deemed to be free because we obtain it free of charge. There's no cost involved. But in the gift economy, in contrast to the private property economy, in the gift economy, gifts are not free. The essence of the gift is that it creates a set of relationships. The currency of a gift economy is, at its root, reciprocity. In Western thinking, private land is understood to be a bundle of rights, whereas in a gift economy, property has a bundle of responsibilities attached to it. Here's reciprocity as a principle of future generations focused. As we consider these instructions, it is good to recall that when Sky Woman arrived here, she did not come alone. Kimmerer is referring to a kind of an indigenous origin story similar to our origin story of Genesis, the story in Genesis of Adam and Eve. There's a story about a woman named Sky Woman. And she notes that Sky Woman did not arrive in her new land alone. She came pregnant. Knowing her grandchildren would inherit the world she left behind, she did not work for flourishing in her time only. It was through her actual reciprocity, the give and take with the land, that the original immigrant became indigenous. I'll read that again. It was through Sky Woman's actions of reciprocity, the give and take with the land, that the original immigrant, Sky Woman, became indigenous. She became where she belonged to the land. For all of us, becoming indigenous to a place means living as if your children's future mattered, to take care of the land as if our lives, both material and spiritual, depended on it. Kimmerer goes into talking about asters and goldenrod. Asters, as you might know, are purple and goldenrod is yellow. And she explores some science that has shown that complementary colors on the color wheel register as most beautiful to human beings. And she wonders how it is that asters and goldenrod tend to grow together in the same environmental places, environmental contexts. And she goes on to write, if my advisor was correct, the visual effect that so delights a human like me may be irrelevant to the flowers. The real beholder, whose eye the flowers hope to catch, is a bee bent on pollination. Bees perceive many flowers differently than humans do, due to their perception of additional spectra such as ultraviolet radiation. And as it turns out, goldenrod and asters appear very similarly to bee eyes and human eyes. So even though the bees can see ultraviolet radiation, in this case, with asters and goldenrod, bees and humans see this very similarly. We both think that the flowers are beautiful, and their striking contrast when they grow together makes them the most attractive target in the whole meadow, a beacon for the bees. Growing together, both receive more pollinator visits than if they each grew alone. So if all the goldenrod grew by itself in a place and all the asters grew by itself in a place, they wouldn't get as many hits from bees as if they grew together. It's a testable hypothesis. It's a question of science, but it's also a question of art and a question of beauty. Why are these flowers beautiful together? It is a phenomenon simultaneously material and spiritual, for which we need all wavelengths, for which we need depth perception. When I stare too long at the world with science eyes, I see an after image of traditional knowledge. Might science and traditional knowledge be purple and yellow to one another? Might they be goldenrod and asters? We see the world more fully when we use both lenses. So she's talking about a reciprocity between ways of seeing, which is embedded in the very fabric of the way creation is made. Just a couple more excerpts here. Here's a element of how reciprocity is regenerative. Reciprocity is a matter of keeping the gift in motion through self-perpetuating cycles of giving and receiving. Our elders taught that the relationship between plants and humans must be one of balance. People can take too much and exceed the capacity of the plants to share again. That's the voice of hard experience that resonates in teachings of never take more than half. And yet, they also teach that we can take too little. If we allow traditions to die, relationships to fade, the land will suffer. These laws are the product of hard experience, of past mistakes. And not all plants are the same. Each has its own way of regenerating. Some plants, unlike sweetgrass, are easily harmed by harvest. Other plants, like sweetgrass, thrive when they are harvested a lot. And her friend Lena would say that the key is to know them well enough to respect the difference. Finally, the concept of the honorable harvest in reciprocity. Cautionary stories of the consequences of taking too much are ubiquitous in native cultures, but it's hard to recall a single one in English. Perhaps this helps to explain why we seem to be caught in a trap of overconsumption, which is as destructive to ourselves as to those we consume. Collectively, the indigenous canon of principles and practices that govern the exchange of life for life is known as the honorable harvest. There are rules of sorts that govern our taking, shape our relationships with the natural, and rein in our tendency to consume, that the world might be as rich for the seventh generation as it is for our own. The details are highly specific to different cultures and ecosystems, but the fundamental principles are nearly universal among peoples who live close to the land. So I hope that in those different excerpts, you've heard a variety of principles that are part of this concept of reciprocity. And we could do similar exercise probably with stewardship or the new creation or other indigenous concepts behind earth living. But what I invite you to tonight in your breakout sessions is to think of which one of these kind of excerpts resonated with you as you heard it. And maybe share in your group why that is. You know, is there a story behind how you live or what happened in your life that made one of these things really stand out to you and resonate with you? And maybe you find that in your own faith life already, or maybe you found it through interaction with the earth and natural system that you live in. I'll drop those in the chat so that they're available for people.
Okay, thank you, Buff. And Mary, are you going to drop us into small groups?
I am all set to push that magic button. And so we have 20 minutes, but maybe I should give you all another second to kind of look at the list that Buff just dropped in there for us. Half a second. Kind of give me a thumbs up when you all are ready, when you think at least you got the list, more or less. Yeah. Okay. Okay. See you all in about 20 minutes then. Thanks.